Thank you for joining us. I'm going to just, if I may, mark the fact that this is likely to be Barry's last full board meeting. And normally I'd say something about that, Barry, at the end of the meeting, but I know there are some members who might not still be with us at the end of the meeting because of other commitments. So I think it would be nicer just to do it now. Colleagues, Barry joined TFN just 3 years ago as we were becoming a statutory body. And I think his first big achievement was the launch of the Strategic Transport Plan, which, given I didn't write it, I think I'm entitled to say, is an excellent and still a groundbreaking document. The first One North vision for 30 years of investment in infrastructure for an economic purpose. And building on that achievement, Barry then developed the capacity of the organisation, which we've seen relentlessly over those 3 years, deliver a whole series of groundbreaking pieces of strategic evidence and advice. Most notably, I would suggest the Northern Powerhouse Rail business case, and of course, illustrated by today's agenda with the very, very important work on decarbonisation, which is already receiving justified plaudits. So those are some of the high points, Barry, but I'm a great believer that organisations are tested in adversity. And you'd only just got your feet under the CEO's table, and we had the timetable debacle, which was none of your direct responsibility, but which you had to live with. And more recently, of course, we've had the dreadful circumstances of the pandemic. And I would suggest to all colleagues on the board that Barry has led us through those difficult days with great skill and what you really need from a CEO when times are tough, great calmness. I'd say that in my view, and I hope I can speak, I'm sure I can speak for the board, Barry is an excellent strategist and strategic thinker and an excellent collaborator. And one of the key skills I think that's absolutely vital for a successful TFN chief executive is the ability to bring together, to work for, but also to encourage agreement between a wide range of civic and business leaders across the North and indeed nationally. And allow me to say personally, I have both valued and perhaps even more importantly enjoyed the working relationship I as chairman have had with Barry as chief executive. So Barry, I don't want to embarrass you. I'll only say I believe you have achieved an enormous amount at TFN when you look at TFN today as against TFN when you started. And as a result of that, and also because you are a good friend, you will be greatly missed. Allow me to say I think you've an awful lot to be proud of in your TFN period. And I'm sure I can speak for the board in saying you will leave us with our very best wishes and our very best wishes for whatever you do next. Barry, would you just like to say something? And sorry to bounce you because I didn't let you know I was going to do that.
John, thank you very much for those kind words that are much appreciated. And you've highlighted some of the really big successes that TFN has enjoyed over the past few years. And I would add to that the modernisation of the train fleet, for instance, a really practical benefit that passengers in the North have had the benefit of. But also a host of smaller schemes, improvements at Middlesbrough Station or the Cumbrian coastline or the a lot of the A59, Keckskill, the recent sort of bit of progress made. So there's a lot of big and small projects have progressed that I take a lot of satisfaction from on behalf of the TFN team. And we have a big year ahead in Transport for the North. And at the heart of that is economic recovery after the crisis, John, as you've said, rail recovery in terms of getting passengers back onto trains at the right time, and indeed on Northern Powerhouse Rail and Integrated Rail Plan, the what, the how, the when. So, but what I would like to say is that all that progress has been because of the great team at Transport for the North, knowledgeable, but more importantly, passionate about making a difference. And they have been fantastic to work with. But of course, what I would like to thank today more than anything else is TFN's board. The board has been great to work with. The commitment and drive of the board is absolutely fundamental to TFN's progress to date and in the future. And thank you all for your support and challenge at times as well, which is exactly right and proper. And John, as you say, it's not always been easy. And I thought what was really telling during the timetable crisis in May 18 that you mentioned is how the board came together in the interest of the North. And so it's when times are difficult, you really see how people act and think. And I think that was a great example of the North really coming together. And I, John, would like to add my personal thanks to you, you've been a great guide and mentor to me, and that's something that I have valued a great deal. I'd like to close just by saying one thing, and the one thing I want to say is, in this job, at many times I've been asked, what is the one thing you would do to improve transport infrastructure in the North? And for much of the last 3 years, I've been saying I would improve the Green Book and I would move the Treasury to the North. And I'm actually glad to say that up to a point, both those things are happening. And I hope the Treasury move to Darlington, or elements of the Treasury moving to Darlington, includes members of the senior civil service. It's really important the decision shapers and policy formers are there. I think that's a good thing. So if I was asked that question today, what is the one thing? I would say, let's commit to build a comprehensive Northern Powerhouse Rail network, and in particular to build a new line between Manchester and Leeds via central Bradford. That link is the big strategic choice to be made and could form the central backbone of Liverpool to Hull, of the new Treasury building in Darlington to Manchester and on to Liverpool, and it would put right, I think, a historic wrong by properly connecting Bradford and unlocking what I think is a great city, a great English city, a great UK city's untapped potential. And I think that's something that people would look back on in 30 years and say that was a good decision made back in 2021 that was far-sighted at the time. So that is the one thing I would like to leave people with. And in closing, John, I'd just like to wish the whole TFN board and TFN as an organisation every success in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, there's some very supportive comments on the chat bar. I think it's very, very difficult in a Teams meeting to take as many comments as we would like, but I really would like to bring in Andy Burnham just to say a word.
Thank you, Chair. It's only a quick word, but I thought you better hear from the backbenchers of the board, Barry, because obviously you've heard from the Chair, and I'd probably have been around as long as anyone on the board and lived through all of this stuff with you, worked closely with you, and have great admiration for you and for what you have done in steering the organisation through these first years. You know, we are in the early years of devolution in the north of England, and these structures we have are not fully formed yet, are they? And I feel that in Greater Manchester, but I bet you felt it as well. We're the guardians of these structures for now, and we have to build them and work them up from here. And the thing I would say, Barry, and I hope I speak for all of the other members of the board here, first and foremost, you've been true to this board, and you've been true to the principle that we speak for the north of England first and foremost. And because of that, the voice of the north is louder today on transport than it was when you came in. And that's the best thing that I can say to you. You have created that situation, which is to correct a fundamental and enduring unfairness in our country, in that the north hasn't been heard on transport, but finally it is being heard. And you played an enormous part in that. So I hope I can speak for everybody in saying thank you, Barry. We will build on what you've left behind, but we will miss you greatly. But you've given great service to the communities across the north of England. Thank you.
So I don't think, colleagues, we can do better than that. So I'm suggesting maybe we leave it there, otherwise we'll really embarrass Barry. But I think we need a better opportunity where everybody can say the things they'd really like to say on a one-to-one basis. And I think when this dreadful pandemic is over, we look forward to the opportunity, Barry, to find the occasion where we can raise a good pint of Northern beer and wish you well. Okay. Now, we do have quite a full agenda, but there is just one thing I'd like to do under this item. I just want to very briefly give the floor to Peter Hendy, just to say a word, Peter, if you will, about the interim report of your very important UK connectivity review.
Thank you, John. I'll be as quick as I can. Just to say the interim report is publicly available, so I won't seek to reproduce it all. But since Barry referred to the Green Book, I'll just start with that and say that in pursuit of looking at better connectivity between the four nations of the United Kingdom, one of the things is obvious, and it's the same thing which has been obvious in the preparation of the strategic transport plan for the North, which is, as Barry says, the traditional way of looking at transport appraisal has always skewed the things that get to the top of the list into large conurbations, and principally, of course, London and South East England. And you expect me to know a little bit about that because I ran transport for London for 10 years. And one of the points I'm making and will further develop in the final report is the need for wider economic appraisal as the basis for bringing forward transport investments, road, rail, ferry and air, which actually create the levelling, which do good things for the levelling up agenda and economic growth, jobs, housing and social cohesion for the United Kingdom as a whole. And that, I think, is absolutely in line with both the work that TfN's done on the transport plan for the North of England and the general philosophy about transport investment. Second thing I'd say is that we have left the European Union, and when we left it, we also left behind the EU Trans-European Network, which was a network designed to identify routes and nodes across the European Union to create EU-wide jobs, growth, housing and social cohesion. I've found widespread interest and no dissent from the proposition that since we're no longer members, we should look at a UK network designed to do similar things. And indeed, if we did look at a UK network, it could be a lot wider than the old EU network was, and in particular could look at some freight and passenger flows which were essential to the economy of the United Kingdom. And you'll see that in the forward that I wrote, I've remarked on a number of those, both connections with Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, but also I wrote improved port capacity, road and rail capacity and journey times east-west across the Midlands and the North for passengers, and to enhance freight capacity and connections from Ireland and onwards to the East Coast ports for exports post-Brexit. That's not the only conclusion that I reached as a consequence of widespread public, political and business consultation, but I thought members on this call, John, might be interested in that. I'm now going to go forward. I've had 200 submissions. I met well over 100 stakeholders, including some of the people on some of the political representatives on the call today. I'll finish my report in August. The government have meanwhile both started a consultation on air passenger duty, or rather the Treasury did it. It was published yesterday at 6:15 in the evening for some reason. Don't ask me why. And also they've put aside 20 million to look at developing business cases for connections which seem, at least to me, to be obvious, pending our full analysis, and which need some more work. One of those is looking at better connections with Scotland through the establishment of HS2 to Birmingham and Crewe. TfN will be well familiar with this because connections between the North of England, Midlands and the North of England and Scotland have been one of the features of the TfN transport plans. And I, left to myself, I'd certainly intend that a measurable amount of that 20 million is spent developing ideas for better capacity from England to Scotland using HS2 as it develops into phase 2A to crew. But there are other things I referred to, including connections on the East Coast Main Line and connections with North Wales to and from the Merseyside and Manchester conurbations. And I think, John, in view of the time, the agenda you've got, that's all I'd want to say. The report's available. I'm always happy, of course, to come back and answer questions, but we've got a lot of work to do between now and August. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. That's really helpful. And I think from the Northern perspective, we saw so much in that connectivity review interim report that was really helpful to the North and resonated, as you've said, with the work that Barry's been leading. Thank you for that. Just then, finally, under item 1, just to try and be informative about the agenda. So there are 2 places on the agenda where the chair could bring forward urgent business. And just to say, I have no item 9, but I do have an item 12. Okay, thank you very much. Can I move then to item 2 on the agenda? Are there any declarations of interest for this meeting, please? Just looking at the chat bar. Great. Okay, so I'll press on. Thank you very much. Item 3 then is the minutes of our meeting, or the public meeting on the 18th of February, where you'll recall we discussed smart travel, we discussed funding and the business plan, and we discussed NPR timing. Can I just check first on the accuracy of those minutes, and then I have a matters arising. On the accuracy, I'll take silence for assent. Thank you. Just to say then that I believe Barry followed up on all of the action points from that in terms of very important letter to the Secretary of State on NPR, press statement, meeting with the Treasury on IST. The reason we don't have a special item 9 today is, of course, we do not have an integrated rail plan for this meeting, but a number of you were with me yesterday for the meeting of the Northern Transport Acceleration Council, where the Secretary of State made some positive comments about the whole of HS2 and described it, the plan would sequence HS2 with NPR. So that's, I think, the update that I'm looking at. And I have a hand up from Darren Hale. Darren.
Hey, John. I was a bit confused at that meeting yesterday because the 2 ministers seem to sort of face in different directions somewhat, because Grant Chap said he would definitely see the IRP in the spring, which I suppose it depends on when you think the season start and finish, isn't it? I suppose, but and then when Andrew, the minister, spoke, he said you wouldn't see it this side of the election because of Purda. Now, I wonder if you've got any clearer view, because clearly I thought when they said spring that we would be seeing it in March or April, I have to say, but so I was a bit concerned to hear it probably wouldn't come this side of May, and I don't know if for you or Barry have perhaps got an update for us.
So we have not had a formal letter to TfN, but from the various things that have been said, Darren, I think we are now clear that it will not be until after Purda. So they've run out of time to make an announcement by the end of this week, and the announcement will come in the spring, indeterminate date, but as soon as possible after the elections. And Dan Jarvis yesterday certainly said he hoped that would be the month of May.
Thank you. I think it's just a shame, obviously, because I'm sorry if I can just come back on that. I suppose,
of course,
if it was going to be before the elections, I would have thought it might be definitely good news for all of us. But if it's been delayed, you always worry, don't you? But hopefully it's just a Purda issue.
Time will tell. We hope so, indeed. Okay, if that's finished the minutes, I'll move then on to our first substantive agenda item, item 4, This is the culmination, clearly, of previous discussions around this board table at recent meetings on the business plan, and I'll ask Barry to introduce it.
Thank you, John. I'll do a very brief introduction to allow time for questions. As previously briefed, we've had a truncated business planning process this year. The funding letter arrived on the 4th of January. I want to thank Ian Craven and his team, plus the members working group, for their help in moving quickly through this process. And clearly we brought back an initial brief to last board, and the business plan is a culmination of that. As I've said earlier, economic recovery post-COVID, rail recovery, again post-COVID, and Northern Powerhouse Rail are three very big fundamentals of this plan. But other key elements are set out in the paper you have at paragraph 1.3. The draft plan and the key performance indicators are attached to the paper. And what we're asking for today is your agreement to finalise the plan. We would then have it desktop published and have it issued publicly thereafter. I think it sets out an ambitious work programme for the year ahead, and I think one that the team are excited and motivated about implementing. And what we really want to do is hit the ground with great momentum going into April and May, and get that work underway. So I was going to stop there, John, and myself, Ian Craven and Tim Foster are very happy to field any questions.
Thank you very much, Barry. So open to the board then for any views on the business plan. And can I start with Andy, please?
Thank you, John, and thank you, Barry. Decarbonisation plan we will come on to discuss, won't we? But I'm very pleased to see the prominence that has within this plan. I just wonder if you could confirm, Barry, that there is a work stream around inclusion with regard to transport in the north. I think am I right in that there's going to be a focused piece of work around inclusivity, accessibility of transport. And I just think it's important to say, John, because I'm not sure this board has ever really focused on disability access issues, but I do think we need to be more focused on it. I don't know what the percentage of train stations across the north that aren't accessible to disabled people, but I do know that it's around 50% in Greater Manchester. And I'm pleased Peter attends this board and takes part in our discussions, but I personally cannot see how that possibly can be justified in this day and age. And I believe work around the accessibility of transport to all of our residents needs to be given a higher priority in the work of this board. And I think we need to give more focus to issues of disability access going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. So what I'm going to suggest we do, Barry, is take a suite of comments and then I'll come back to you. So I'm coming now to Darren, again, Darren Hale, and then I'll come to Peter Kennan. Darren.
Yeah, it's just a comment really on the back of looking at the business plan in terms of the other element of business that was discussed yesterday at that meeting, John, was around obviously the sort of national bus strategy, which and I know a number of people present made comments on. And whilst, you know, let's be honest about it, that's very welcome. I am concerned that obviously on page 38 and 39 it talks about obviously the government funding enforced rollback of IST, and I'm just concerned as to how the national bus strategy would fit with TFN, because obviously speaking as a non-PTE area, following on from obviously my leader's comments yesterday, I'm just a bit concerned that we end up having a complete patchwork quilt of different bus solutions across the north at a time that we're trying to unify our train solutions across the north, because obviously, as I think Andy mentioned yesterday, you know, for many of our residents, buses are one of the key modal forms of travel in our areas, and I'm not feeling it I know it's in the budget document, but will that sit under the strategy and policy? Because I'm just a bit concerned otherwise it will Transport for the North will be left out the loop in terms of a major piece of strategic planning across the North.
Thank you, Darren. We'll come back on that. So I'm going to come now to Peter Kennan, and after Peter, I'll come to Mark Ralston.
Thank you, Chair. When we were going through the members' working group, we identified the core TFM programmes, and if we look at pages 28 and 29 of the papers today, one of those programmes was, as Andy Burnham has just said, decarbonisation and its place within the Northern Transport Charter. What seems to have slipped down the agenda a bit and hasn't really made it into the final cut is freight as a distinctive item, rather than just a subset of decarbonisation. And I was just interested to know where the place of freight is in here. That was my first observation. And secondly, we welcome in Sheffield City Region, and I have spoken to Mayor Jarvis about this, the members' working group that's proposed at page 29 to guide through the Northern Transport Charter. And just want to make the point that we're very keen as a city region to be involved in that group and to enable it to make its full contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to note, we've a helpful contribution on the chat bar from Paul Haslam. So I'll come now to Mark Ralston, and after Mark, I'll ask Louise to contribute.
Can anybody hear me? Unfortunately,
Yeah,
I can't.
we can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'll keep it brief. Officers are to be commended for the depth and breadth of the business plan, and it clearly highlights a lot of the sort of key proposals and opportunities here. Could I just make a plea that there is some reference in there to a recognition that some of the local schemes that are actually embedded in some of these programmes can have a disproportionate economic benefit locally. And I wouldn't want that message to be lost in some of the bigger schemes that are part of the plan. Secondly, it's a more general point. Getting the world is full of business plans in the public sector and the private sector, and generally they just tend to end up in cupboards and gather dust because they're not seen as terribly relevant by a lot of people, wrongly in my view. But language is incredibly important. So when we get from this stage now of actually producing the business plan, can I just make a plea that it is drafted in common sense language? The executive summary is really, really punchy, because I'd rather have 2 pages of golden nuggets than 300 pages of consultancy speak that people get turned off by. So it's just a plea for that type of approach in the production, please.
Wise counsel, Mark. Thank you very much. So let me come now to Louise, and then after Louise, I'll hand the floor to Hans Mundry.
Thanks very much, John. And just really to pick up on a few things that people have already mentioned and to enhance it. I think in terms of what it's called, I just wondered if we should call it a recovery and renewal plan. We've all produced them within councils, and I think it sounds a bit more snappy than a business plan. So that's just going back to Mark's point about language and the importance of it. I think just picking up on Darren's point about the bus strategy, I think it would be good to link it into we talk a lot about the whole journey. So buses are going to be an important part of that, as is active travel, things like EV charging points at stations. But I think it's linking into what councils are doing as well. So it's a bit more knitting everything together, if that's probably not the right word to use, but it's just looking at that whole picture and making sure it sort of draws in and builds on all that work that's going on. But otherwise, yeah, a good document. Thanks, Barry, for doing it.
Thank you for that support, appreciated. A question on the chat bar for clarification. One or two of us referred to the ministerial meeting yesterday. So in answering that question, the ministerial meeting yesterday was the Northern Transport Acceleration Council. There was a discussion about the acceleration dashboard, and the 110 local projects which are on that dashboard. And then the substantive piece of business was a fairly wide-ranging discussion, a positive discussion, I think it's fair to say, about the national bus strategy. And the question also asked, was there any statement after the meeting? I'm not aware of any statement after the meeting. It was the regular quarterly meeting of the Northern Transport Acceleration Council. And indeed, the publication of the bus strategy, in a sense, was preceding the meeting and then was the business for the meeting. I hope that's helpful. Let me come now to Hans, and after Hans has spoken, I'll come to Susan Hinchcliffe.
Yes, thanks, John. I think what I want to talk about the bus strategy. What sort of pops out for me is to keep an eye on is how much it depends on grants and bidding, and I think that's something we need to be very careful eye on. That some towns can benefit by the bidding system, and some will be left behind. And I think going forward, some of these strategies that are coming up with, it seems to be a bidding war or a bidding process to go for. I don't think that's helpful going forward, to actually have a collective way of work going forward where we sort of bid against each other and government puts pots of money up for us all to bid for. So some will benefit. It creates losers, which I don't think is a good way of moving forward. And particularly the way some of the grants have been awarded recently, it sort of says we need to keep a careful eye on how it's used, and also where any grant funding does get put forward, if people bid for it. Like basically, keep an eye on who's winning the bids.
Thanks for that, Hans. And now can I come to Susan?
A quick point, Chair, thank you. Obviously, Councillor Blake has now been elevated, and I know she was a leading light on that working group around the Northern Transport Charter, and just sort of to make the point that we in West Yorkshire would like to continue to be involved in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. I think I've caught everybody who wanted to contribute. If not, shout now. Thank you very much, colleagues. A good range of comments. Well, Barry, I think a lot of those comments, not all of them, but a lot of them actually came back to the hardy perennial of where TFN's work interrelates with local schemes. So feel free to comment on that and anything else you want to pick up on.
So, thank you, John. What I thought I might do is bring Tim Foster in on two of the questions. First of all, because Andy made that really good point about inclusion and about access and accessibility. And there's a lot of work ongoing, but perhaps Tim could just comment on how we model, because inclusion is a big bit of how we're approaching things. On Peter's freight point, and then I can address, I think, the other points. So, Tim, are you there? Are you able to come in?
Yes, I'm on, Barry. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And on the inclusive transport inclusion agenda, that's a really important part of the strategic transport plan, and our objectives are around inclusive and sustainable growth. So we've actually just started the work to commission a major, what I think is the first, certainly pan-northern study at the way in which transport both enables, but more importantly, can exclude groups in the north or people in the north from opportunities. So that research will both pick up views and perceptions of members of the public, but also from local councils across the north. So that work is just starting now. It will come back to the board, I suspect, late summer for a discussion of the conclusions, and then critically how we then feed that back into the development of TFM policy strategy, and particularly how we work with you and your officers on supporting local activity. Sitting alongside that, there's been a lot of work in building this into the modelling work that TFN does, and the board saw some of the analysis around Northern Pass Rail, I think, at the previous meeting. So we're now at the point where we can demonstrate and bring forward the evidence on these issues. Really importantly, and that also picks up a really important point about conditions and other groups who for different reasons struggle to make use of public transport in particular. So a really big agenda for this year coming. Very apologies. Remind me what the second point was.
So the second point was freight isn't explicitly labelled as a big programme, but I know, Tim, the freight strategy, for instance, is part of, and the consultation, that's part of what you're looking at next year.
Yes, and that will be the big. Again, the big pivotal point on freight, when we're able to bring post IRP, that we're able to bring the freight strategy to this board, and that includes setting out for the first time the key road and rail freight interventions across the north, and then we have factored into the business plan some capacity to be able to take those interventions forward. But of course, they cut across both the work that Network Rail are doing, that Northern Powers Rail and HS2 will do post IRP. So what we'll want to do, as well as now the development of free ports and other things. So what we'll want to do is post integrated rail plan, bring you back the freight strategy, which will then go out for consultation. And as part of that, we'll set out the key areas where we think at a regional level TFN can add most value to get interventions into the pipeline and start getting them developed.
Thank you, Tim. And Andy, I think just on that pure accessibility point, I think it'd be useful if we brought back either to here or the Rail North Committee some facts and figures, just where we are in terms of full accessibility to stations on the railway and where we think that trajectory is going in terms of Network Rail's plans to invest, or indeed the train company's plans to invest in stations. Because I think knowing where we are, knowing where we're going is really important in that. So we'll take an action to do that. Just to address the other points made, Darren, your point about the potential patchwork quilt of ticketing schemes is a real concern I have as well, and that also aligns with Hans's point on this is bidding the whole time in, and what we're really waiting for in that is the government's rail reform, the Williams Review publication, and what that will mean for ticketing, and what we are hoping for is that rail reform will produce a platform that will allow multi-mode to be developed in a way that you can have smart ticketing across boundaries of local transport authorities areas. So I think that's really key. So you're right to flag that as an issue. It's something that the new post we're creating in strategic rail to maintain some smart travel capacity, we'll be able to look at that and keep that under review. In terms of the members working group that both West Yorkshire and Sheffield City Region mentioned, we'll be writing out in the next few days to ask for volunteers, and we would very much hope you'll both volunteer. So from that point of view, we would welcome your and others' participation in that. Mark, you made the point about local schemes, and in my opening remarks, I did make some comments on some of the smaller schemes, and these are really important. And I will look at the plans and make sure that is brought out clearly, because you're right. Yes, the big strategic schemes are clearly very important, but for local communities, the smaller schemes have a massive impact, and that's right. And we will look at your point in plain English as well. That's a good one too. Louise, on the business plan, I'm just looking at Ian slightly here, because I think, Ian, we have a legal duty, or we have a duty to publish a business plan under the Constitution that has to be approved by the board, but we could very much look at emphasising, Louise, the recovery and renewal elements of that. So I think if we'll take an action just to try to bring that out even more strongly, would that be okay, Louise? Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hopefully, John, have addressed all the points, but hopefully that's the points addressed that were raised.
Chairman, you're on mute there.
Okay, I'm on mute. I knew I'd make that mistake. I was just going to say, Barry, I think it's just Darren Hale's point on... Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So I think there's just Darren Hale's point on buses you might want to pick up on.
Well, I think just that new smart travel post we're creating, John, will partly be aimed at trying to maintain that degree of cohesion across local transport authority areas, that as any smart ticketing initiative evolves, we avoid that patchwork quilt. So I agree with Darren's concern very much, and the bidding in approach that hands, sort of generates sort of lots of sort of, different flowers blooming different places, which can be a good thing. And Liverpool's recent plans that they announced for hydrogen buses shows how somebody can move ahead with a particular element of this. And that's actually a positive bit of bidding in some ways, or that was under a different regime in some ways. But we should try and avoid that patchwork quilt in the interest of passengers, Darren. I think that's very much the point I would take from that. So.
Very good. Well, thank you, colleagues. That's been a very rich and worthwhile discussion. So I think we have a number of amendments we need to make, including the references to freight. But other than that, I think we're seeing support. So I'm going to put the report to the board under the recommendation in paragraph 2.1 to seek approval for the business plan and delegating to Barry the wording finalisation. Do I have support for that? Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you. Thumbs up. That's great. We'll move on then to item 5, which is the budget. Now, this has also been to the board at both the January and the February meetings, so hopefully we can now conclude this matter, and I'll hand over to Ian Craven.
Thank you, John. As members hopefully will be able to see, the budget that we're about to discuss flows directly from the business plan that we've just been talking about in the previous report. The gross budget that we are proposing for the 2021-22 financial year is 78.7 million. That includes MPR contingencies and unallocated reserves of around 18.5 million. So the net budget against which we will monitor TFM performance is with those contingencies removed. So that's 60.2 million. If we compare to this year, this represents a reduction of 5.6 million, or around 10%, from the original committed budget for 2021. The proposed budget is fully funded through grants, contributions, contracted income, and brought forward reserves, and that's all set out within the report. The main movements that I'd like to draw your attention to from the original committed budget for this year can be summarised in 3 parts. Firstly, the cessation of ICT funding has led to a fall in the committed budget for the ICT programme of just over £8 million. In addition, the net core funded budget has fallen by just under 3 million. That reflects, at least in part, the reduction in TFM's core funding allocation. And finally, those 2 movements have been at least partially offset by an increase in committed MPR budgets of around £5 million. So that takes us up to about 48.5 million. Now, it is worth noting, and I've previously noted, that the MPR elements of TFM's expenditure are dependent on in-year approvals by departmental budget holders. And in this year, it's specifically, in addition, the report does note the uncertainty in relation to the RP that's already been discussed in this meeting. That may have an impact in terms of the need to replan and rebudget for the MPR programme, depending on the timing and the substance of the IRP when it does emerge. This report also sets out the reserve strategy for approval. The proposed approach in the report is consistent with that approved by members at the February board. Members will note that it differs from the previous strategy in that it explicitly seeks to use brought forward resources to fund ongoing recurring activity. As noted in the report, this still leaves TFM with substantial budgeted reserves at the end of March 2022. But in any case, we are going to need to reassess the reserve strategy in the light of the multi-year CSR that is expected to take place later this year. Finally, the report represents the Treasury management strategy for approval. This was reviewed and approved for onward presentation to this board by the Audit and Governance Committee meeting of the 18th of February, and members should note that it's only been marginally amended from the version that we've been operating under previously. I was under instructions to keep this fairly brief, so probably best if I stop and if people have got comments or questions, I'm happy to take those.
Thank you, Ian. That's very helpful. Any comments from board members on the final budget proposal? Yes, I think is it Hans? Yes, Hans? No, sorry, who have I got? Councillor H.
Councillor Susan.
Susan.
I'm sorry, Susan.
Okay.
I haven't did your tag. So, Susan.
Just a quick one, really. I mean, a question about how we're going to make sure we're delivering against this budget in terms of pace of delivery and spend. Because I think that is part of the issue, isn't it? That we need to show and demonstrate that we're making accelerated progress, particularly about something like Northern Powerhouse Rail, and therefore we, as a board, need to be on that ourselves as well, and making sure that things are delivered at pace, and that if things can't be delivered in one area, that we switch the budget around. So have we got mechanisms in, really, to make sure that by the end of the year, we can demonstrate that we've spent up to what we said we were going to do, and perhaps more from reserves, just to show the pace of delivery that we all know we need to achieve and that government wants us to achieve?
So we'll take a basket of questions, Ian, and then I'll come back to you.
Yep.
So any further contributions? Louise, please.
Thank you. Agree with what Susan's just said, but I'm just picking up on our investment strategy, and I just wondered whether we need to start looking at ethical investment. We're going to be discussing decarbonisation very shortly, and it would be good to sort of link our investments with our ambitions around decarbonisation. So I just wondered if that's something we need to look at and how we could go about doing it.
Thanks, Louise. Any further comments? Okay, back to you then, Ian, on Susan and Louise's points.
I think the point that Councillor Hinchcliffe raises is a good one, and it's mentioned in the executive summary of the report, and it's something that's been giving us some that we've been considering over the last few weeks. I think if I could just divide it into two parts. I think there is a specific issue around MPR in terms of how that budget is set and controlled, and obviously with it being a co-clienting arrangement, there are a set of processes that we have to go through in order to draw down those funds and agree those budgets. And one of the things that is a specific risk to us that is acknowledged in the report, and I've just referred to, is the IRP and the impact that may have on the NPR business plan and also on the budget. So that is something that we're going to have to focus on very closely. And I think, in very short order after we get the IRP, we need to be able to come back to the board and give a view on what impact, if any, we think that is going to have on our ability to deliver this business plan and budget in the course of this year. In terms of the rest of the balance of our expenditure, which is about 10%, the NPR accounts for about 90% of what's in the budget, and the balance is generally core funded. Again, the need to make sure that we spend and to budget, and it's less about expending to budget and more about delivering activity to budget. The expenditure just follows on behind. We are looking at additional processes that we can put in place to manage that, and also in terms of acting more quickly in terms of wiring funding from one priority to another. Obviously, keeping the board absolutely involved and informed about that to make sure that we're still delivering against board priorities. It is the case that, as we've mentioned previously, that certain activities have had to drop out of the plan for this year because of the funding reduction that we face. So there are kind of reserve activities that can be brought forward into our work programme if we do fall behind on some of the activity. I think the principal risk in terms of activity is actually, as we've had this year, delays to things like Williams Review or decarbonisation strategies or whatever has a consequential effect on TfM's ability to spend. So we just need to be reacting quickly to that. Moving on to the investment strategy. At the moment, the strategy essentially drives us to a fairly narrow range of investments. Most of what we have money market fund investments, we have DMADF deposits, and the balance goes into our own bank, which is Barclays. We don't have any more sophisticated investment program than that just at the moment. I mean, it's certainly something that we can look into, and it probably is not a bad time to do a kind of route. You know, we will undertake during the year. We can have a look at the investment strategy generally, just in the same way that I think we probably need to look at things like procurement strategies as well, in light of changes that may be made to procurement law post Brexit. So that is certainly something that we can explore. But as I say, at the moment, we are investing in a relatively narrow range of what are pretty vanilla repositories for our funding.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian. In that case, I'll put the budget to the board under item paragraph 2.1 of the paper. We're seeking approval for the budget, for the position on reserves, for the position on outcome, and for the minor amendment to the Treasury management statement. Can I have a thumbs up or wavy hand? Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you, Councillor Matthews. Yeah, that's fabulous. So, Ian, you have a budget.
Thank you, John.
So if we move to item 6, so this was on the previous meeting's agenda, and I asked members to write in with any comments they had at the last meeting. It's back here because it's an important item. Are there any further comments any members would like to make about the risk register? Okay, thank you very much, colleagues. I'm checking the chat bar. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much. So under paragraph 4.1 of the paper, we're asked to approve the content of the risk register. Obviously, this is regularly looked at in the Audit and Governance Committee, but we're just asked to approve the content. So do I have support for that? Thank you very much, Hans. Thank you, Heather. Right, we move to item 7, which is the Decarbonisation Strategy. Now, we did discuss this at great length at the last partnership board. So this is now coming back, if you like, from second to third reading debate. So I hope it's a very important issue, but I hope we can move through this relatively speedily. Peter Cole.
Thank you, John. I'm just sharing a slideshow. Can anyone see that as yet? I don't think it's come through.
Yes, we can.
You can. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, so today I'll just be providing a quick overview of TFN's work on the strategy and asking for your endorsement to take the strategy to public consultation during the summer. So the Transport Decarbonisation Challenge for the UK is daunting, and obviously that's no less so in the north. Travel around our region is heavily car focused. We have nearly 60% of trips made by car, and most of those only involve one occupant. If you look at surface transport across the north, including HGVs, that equates to about 26 million tonnes of carbon dioxide per year. And to put that in context, that's about 23% of the total UK road emissions, and actually 6% of total UK whole economy emissions. And over half of those 26 million tonnes comes from our car journeys, and another 10 of the 26 million tonnes is coming from road freight. And indeed, 87% of freight trips in the north happen on our roads. And although the population density is a lot less in rural areas, people living in those areas generate about 3 times the emissions of those in urban areas. And all our areas need to decarbonise. Nowhere can be left behind, and that gives us a really strong pointer as to where some of our focus should lie. But where there are challenges, there are always opportunities, and the next couple of years represent a watershed moment for redefining our region. We need to seize the moment to maximise the environmental co-benefits from decarbonisation, the improvements in air quality, and the increase in physical activity. We need to not only seek to ensure we don't exacerbate existing social exclusion and inequity, but also use this transport revolution as a chance to address the disparities that have developed over many years. We need to help our existing industries and businesses to convert to clean energy and clean mobility and enjoy the efficiencies that can bring. But we also need to create new jobs and equip our communities with new skills by ensuring that the North is really at the vanguard of the opportunities falling out of rapid clean growth. In developing our strategy, we've undertaken a review of existing clean growth initiatives being championed by our partners alongside business and industry. And we've sought to understand where TFN could play a meaningful role in delivering and optimizing the benefits from those opportunities. And we'll do that through influencing government to up their ambition and preparing plans and strategies to really accelerate key areas of transport decarbonisation, like the rollout of EV charging and HGV hydrogen refueling infrastructure. The analysis that underpins this strategy provides the North with a really strong evidence base on which to move forwards. And we now want to build on that strong start with focused research, attracting pilots and trials and acting as a pivot for collating and sharing best practice. Our existing relationships with partners and other cross-sectoral stakeholders from across the North puts us in a really good position to facilitate the partnerships and joined up thinking that's going to be needed. And our analytical framework provides us with deep modelling capabilities, and it'll allow us to provide partners with spatially disaggregated data, which is consistent and robust. We'll also be driving the business cases and implementation of major pan-northern public transport infrastructure. And finally, with around 70% of the North's road emissions occurring on the major road network and strategic road network, a regional view on how emissions are generated and reduced is crucial. All of our places in the North have very different starting points when it comes to transport decarbonisation, and they'll all require different solutions implemented across different timescales. And this strategy, and particularly the actions that fall out of it, will allow us to take that regional view and ensure we achieve our close to zero date of 2045 together. The STP, so the Strategic Transport Plan in 2019 identified and committed to setting a pathway to close to zero. And that's subsequently been followed by a long process of detailed evidence making and substantial engagement both with TFN's partners and other stakeholders through a series of steps. The Northern Transport Charter identified the need for a more ambitious pathway to frame the issue at a regional level and affect change. And in parallel, we've developed our future travel scenarios, which set out the potential range of plausible futures to frame our strategy. And that strategy now sets out the likely pathway, the scale of the challenge and the opportunities at a regional level. A pathway to 2045 is realistic, and it allows different parts of the North to move at different speeds. But equally, it is ambitious, and it sends a really clear signal about our intent. It's the culmination of a lot of work to systematically create the tools, the capability and the evidence to not only produce a wide-ranging strategy and robust data for use by our partners, but also the ability to now forge ahead with those actions at pace. The strategy frames the next phases of TFN's work, flowing through to the IPBA, so that's the Investment Programme Benefits Analysis Assessment process, the development of Northern Powerhouse Rail, and the implementation of our priority decarbonisation actions defined in the strategy. And assuming we have an endorsement of the strategy today, we'll be looking to work up public consultation materials throughout April and May, with a view to commencing the consultation post-elections. We'll work with partners' officers to develop those consultation materials, and those will be provided for your review by correspondence. We envisage the public consultation lasting for 12 weeks during the summer, and that's with a view to taking an updated strategy to this board in the autumn, and that'll align us with COP26 in November, over which we're already currently liaising with the MP11 and Decarbonate to present a holistic view of the North's approach to decarbonisation. And in the meantime, our current business plan sets out the steps we'll be taking to start work implementing the strategy, along with the IPBA process throughout the next year. Thank you. John, I think you may be on mute again.
Twice. Thank you for that, Peter. And I think a sign of what you and colleagues have achieved with this strategy is the fact I had a very supportive letter from Anthony Ray, writing on behalf of a range of environmental organisations. And Anthony, board members will recall, was very much a contributor going back, Peter, to 2019 and the STP, when he and his representative organisations didn't feel we had enough to say on decarbonisation. And his letter yesterday was very supportive. So I think that's very helpful. I'll now come to points from the board, and I'll start with Chris Brewis, please. Chris Brewis.
Well, mine will be fairly brief, thank you, Chairman. I thank for an excellent report, and I think that time is of the essence here, and I have sometimes looked forward and hoped we may become not only exemplars nationally in driving this agenda forward, but maybe internationally as well, and to receive a lot of, kudos. But what I can only say is something that is really worthwhile would be very much in everyone's to everyone's advantage. I have my 100% support, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'll now come to Darren Hale, and after Darren, I'll come to Peter Cannon.
Yeah, it sort of follows on. Thanks, Chair. It sort of follows on from the point that I think Hans made earlier about freight. I think it was Hans that made the point about freight. I'm just wondering whether in the decarbonising rail section, it sort of very much has a focus of passenger transport rather than freight. And I just wondered if that could be, if we had the option to tighten that slightly, because certainly in our sort of offline discussions with ministers, when we talked about sort of electrifying Leeds to Hull, and I know most people be fed up with me talking about it, Leeds, Hull, Sheffield, Hull, we have said it would be a shame to stop at the station and not do the last 2 miles to the docks. And certainly, I know in the minister's letter back to Tim and myself, he sort of accepted that point fully. So I just wonder whether for both our Liverpool colleagues and ourselves, whether we could actually obviously talk about freight as well as passenger in the decarbonising rail section.
Yeah, and I'm seeing Liam nodding there as well. Yeah, thumbs up. Thank you very much. Peter will come back on that at the end of the opening comments. So Peter Cannon, and after Peter, I'll come back to Andy Burnham.
Thank you, Chair. I was chairing a session about decarbonisation of Sheffield City region just last night, and I was in awe of the expertise and skill set of the panel members, and it made me realise even more how absolutely vital this is, and how important it is that we work closely with Transport for the North in implementing. So on behalf of Mayor Jarvis, who unfortunately has had to send his apologies at very short notice, we'd like to endorse the adoption of the strategy and the trajectory, and we want to thank the team for working so hard to create such a comprehensive document. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll come now to Andy, and after Andy, I'll give the floor to Mark Ralston. Andy.
Thank you, Chair. I want to strongly endorse this piece of work. I think Peter has set out a really fantastic proposal there. And the timing with COP is perfect, isn't it? We want to put the north of England in the best possible light, don't we, as we get to the COP26. The key point I would want to make, John, as we sort of move towards public consultation is not allowing this agenda to be seen as though it's separate to our core mission of improving public transport in the north of England. And I would encourage Peter to go back to that figure he showed us about car usage and the dominance of the car in the north of England. Question is why? Why does it dominate? It dominates because of the poor quality of public transport and the high cost to the travelling public of public transport, particularly if they try and take integrated journeys. If they try and mix modes, rail, bus, and then tram in our case, it costs a lot of money because we don't have a system that sees the one journey, we see 3 journeys. And so I think it has to kind of speak to that. You know, the core mission of improving public transport is linked to decarbonisation, and we mustn't allow the two to be sort of seen as separate competing priorities. John, if I could say in the endorsement of 2045, if there could be recognition that parts of the north will want to move and are moving ahead of that date, that has to be a backstop date. rather than a sort of sense of everybody moving slowly at the same pace. I mean, everybody will be making their own judgments about this, but we have a date of 2038, which is a science-led target for Greater Manchester. And we are increasingly working as One Northwest on this. So Louise, Steve and I recently met with Net Zero Northwest, which is at this stage largely an energy-driven entity. So Siemens and Cadent and some of the big energy suppliers who have aligned with our ambition of 2038 and are making real changes. Transport hasn't yet come on board with that. And I think this work needs to sort of show how you will plug into those regional structures below the northern level to then make the quicker progress where people are calling for that quicker progress. Because obviously we're being asked to introduce a clean air zone across our 10 boroughs. We're making a decision tomorrow, John, on the future of buses in Greater Manchester. So yes, there's an alignment here of agendas that needs to sort of, to be within this strategy so that it looks like it's sensitive to where areas are moving more quickly and not looking like we're all moving to 2045. So I just strongly welcome it. I think it's excellent work for transport for the North to be leading. I just want to congratulate Peter and his team for everything they've done.
Thank you, Andy, for that. Can I come then to Mark, and after Mark, I'll come to Louise.
Thank you, Chair, and just similar to endorse all the comments that have been made, and Peter and the team are to be commended on the quality and extent of this piece of work. Could I just also make a general point that decarbonisation is actually an economic opportunity as well to drive economic growth in the North. And we shouldn't lose sight of that linkage, because there are huge economic opportunities from this agenda. And we should be pushing that as well as part of the overall strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good point made, Mark. And finally, Louise.
Thanks very much, John. Just like to reiterate, this is a great document and what a step forward. The first meeting I attended of Transport for the North, I actually raised an issue around climate emergency, and it's like, oh yes, we better think about that. And it's great that we've got to this point now. Just building on the freight issue, I think freight's getting it off our roads is going to be really important. And I'm just wondering things like railheads and where they are, because I know certainly in our area, if we had another few hundred metres of track, then freight would be able to get directly into industrial zones. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but we've got a fantastic canal network as well. And, you know, is there a means for using canals in short amounts? I'm not saying, you know, because it'll take days, but there might be some way of linking those in. And also, how about a hydrogen refueling network, so that as hydrogen is rolled out as a method for fueling. So they're just a few things, but great that we're in the position of hopefully endorsing this to move forward today.
Thank you, Louise. And Susan?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with all the comments made by colleagues previously. It is a good piece of work and good to see some of the detail in there, which is useful for our own development. Yes, we have local targets as well. So West Yorkshire has a target of net zero carbon by 2038, making significant progress by 2030, because Leeds as a city has a target of 2030 and are accelerating their progress to achieve that. Just thinking about, you know, COP26, I wouldn't mind knowing, is there something we need to all knit together what we're doing about that, don't we really? Because we're all doing different things. I know the LGA are also pitching for workshops. It's just some coming together of key messages across the North for a board like this, I think is quite important. So are we bringing that together in this arena, really? This should be absolutely our sweet spot as TFN, because everything we do is about carbon reduction, surely. If you think about Bradford, obviously, I think it was great to hear Barry endorsing our proposition to put Bradford on NPR. But all journeys between Bradford and Leeds, which is the biggest economic area outside London, 74% of those journeys are in the car. And we know, therefore, we've got to decrease that by 21% car usage by 2038. That's a huge endeavour, actually. So everything we do and everything TFN does contributes to resolving that and getting to that target, doesn't it, really? And I'm just wondering, when governments are making their decisions, are they taking this as seriously as well as TfN is? Have they got a similar kind of measurement framework to make sure that when we talk about future economic growth, which is going to be green growth, and this is a way of measuring that. So how seriously are they taking this work and the decisions they're about to make in the IRP, as we initially talked about earlier?
Thank you, Susan. Some good questions there that I know Peter will come back to in a moment. But can I just give the floor to Steve Curl from the Cumbria Lep? Steve?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think it's to recognise the importance of rural economies as well. It's a great that where not just dominant. Therefore, the emphasis in this on electric charging and so on is really welcomed. And overall, it's an outstanding document. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Paul Haslam on the chat has made the point that there's a very important link here with air quality, which is clearly a point well made. Let me just comment then, as a member of the board, I have another hat as a visiting professor of University College, where I'm working on climate change, and comes back to Andy's point about the ambition here. If we look nationally and across all sectors at our progress on achieving climate change targets, clearly the biggest progress has been made in the energy field on generation of electricity. And transport to date has been one of the hard to reach sectors. And whilst we are making some progress on electric passenger vehicles, there's an awful lot still to be done before we can say we're going to hit our targets on heavy goods vehicles. And therefore, if you look at the north as a whole, with those big arterial links between city regions, I think what Peter Cole has brought us is actually a very ambitious target. It's a target that's achievable because of the good work Transport for the North has done. But let's not underestimate just how much of a transformation this will require in not only moving to electric heavy vehicles, but also achieving the mode shift that a number of board members have mentioned. And of course, under that overall achievement, there will be faster progress in different parts of the North, facing slightly different mixes of problems. I would hope we could do even better than 2045, but it's an impressive target because of those factors. So, Peter, is there anything you'd like to pick up on from the points made? Darren Hale had a point about freight. Andy Burnham had a point about integrating this into everything TfN does, and of course, clearly some other points. Peter.
Yes. So starting up on the rail freight point made by Councillor Hale, we can certainly look at tightening up some wording on that. Essentially, if rail freight's to decarbonise, it needs to be electrified. That's really the only way at the moment that it can be done in terms of the sort of energy and the mass the energy that's needed to shift the mass. So absolutely, it's got to happen. You've got to decarbonise the last few miles, otherwise it just doesn't work. And picking up on Mayor Burnham's point about the public transport being the core, our core mission, and that is part and part of decarbonisation. Absolutely. In terms of his comments on the trajectory, yes, I guess the regional trajectory is inclusive, if you like, of all the different sort of speeds that we expect our places to be travelling on, and we actually need many of our places to move quicker than that to be able to meet that. The trajectory itself is we're looking to reduce emissions by 95% by 2040, and we have worked with many of our partner authorities who are developing trajectories to try and align as closely as possible to their dates. And we'll continue to sort of look at that. Moving on, I think to Councillor Gittin's comments about freight and canal use. I don't think that's a silly thing to raise at all. I think it's an excellent point. I think how we use our waterways, we've got the biggest inland port at Goole, and we should be using our waterways more where it can be for the types of freight that don't need to be moved at high speed and so on. So I think that's a great point. One of our priority actions is around looking at hydrogen refueling network. And at the moment, I sit on the Hydrogen Partnership for the North, and that has a work stream looking at exactly this. And the idea is that we do bring all the existing work streams across the region that are looking at this, like HyNet and Zero Carbon Humber and the Tees Valley, to make sure that that all comes together into sort of the same thinking. And specifically, we'll be looking at the HGV network, but also looking at potential for rail and indeed buses and potentially coaches too. So there are lots of inputs to that sort of study. Picking up on the COP26 point, yes, we're in discussions with MP11 and Decarbonate about how we present a sort of a joint voice on that. And I think we'll certainly be happy to bring some further information to partners as to how that's shaping up and take suggestions as to how people could contribute. I guess on Councillor Hinchcliffe's point about whether governments are taking it as seriously as we are, well, I guess we will see. The Transport Decarbonisation Plan is now due, after having been delayed for quite some time. It's now due, we think, for publication in May, end of May. But we're keen to stress our role and the role of regional transport authorities, the strategic transport bodies, to DFT. And we've been doing that alongside the other strategic transport bodies, but also adequate investment in our local areas and adequate funding for our local authorities as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And just to note, there was a really good point from Mark Roberts on the chat bar about linking this with the digital connectivity, which is clearly part of avoiding carbon impactful travel that can be achieved in other ways. Thank you for that. Can I therefore put the decarbonisation strategy, as in paragraph 5.1 of the board paper, to the board for approval? Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you, everybody. That's really helpful. Okay, good achievement. Well, Peter, please take the plaudits of the board for some excellent work.
Thank you.
Right, let me move on to item 8 then, which is the governance report, and I'll hand over to Julie Openshaw.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully the report is reasonably self-explanatory, so I'll try to be as brief as possible in introducing it. It covers 3 separate areas, the first of which is the independent members of the Audit and Governance Committee. So on this topic, the report notes that the terms of office of the 3 existing independent members of the Audit and Governance Committee expire at the end of this month. And in order to retain the valuable experience and understanding of TfM's processes, which they've built up during their term and which helped to support the work of the committee, and with the agreement of all 3 of those members that they would be prepared to serve another term, the proposal is that each term be extended for a further 3 years. As well as that, thought has also been given as to how to plan for the future in terms of working to avoid the situation where all 3 terms continue to expire simultaneously. And whilst it's possible that from time to time a vacancy may occur mid-term, if this doesn't transpire, then a similar situation would occur in the future. So the proposal is therefore that a 4th post for an independent member be created, and that would be filled by public recruitment process as the original posts were, and that will start to allow for the beginning of a rolling process of turnover for posts. So the recommendation on this topic is that the existing members' terms be extended for a further 3 years and their contracts with TfN extended on that basis, and that a recruitment process for a 4th member be undertaken. And in due course, a report on the appointment of the 4th member will be presented to board. Chairman, would you like me to continue with the other two matters, or would you like to discuss at that point?
Thank you, Julie. I think it would probably be most productive if we just paused and allow members to come back on your recommendation. So, do we have any comments on this, or do members wish to proceed to a decision? Councillor Brewis?
Only the briefest one possible, Chairman, to say what a sensible idea it is, and I'm happy to move it.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, then on Chris Brewis's recommendation, I put this proposal in paragraph 6.1 of Julie's paper for approval. Thank you very much, Susan. Yeah, Heather, thank you. That's approved then, Julie.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'll move on to the second topic. So on this one, Councillor Gittins has requested that the board consider her request for a review of the General Purposes Committee. And members may recall that the General Purposes Committee was established as part of the review of the consultation in June 2019, but no members have so far been nominated to that committee, and so far it has never met. An initial consultation of chief legal officers from the constituent authorities and executive board has been undertaken, and those responses have been appended to this report. Other than that, though, I am aware that there are differing views across TFN as to the general principles of membership and the function of the General Purposes Committee. And the proposal that board is therefore invited to consider today is that a member working group be set up to consider both the membership and the function of the General Purposes Committee in some depth, and also that a consultation of members of the board as a whole be carried out prior to the first meeting of that member working group. If board approves the setting up of a member working group, then it would be helpful to have details of any members who would like to be on that group, either today if at all possible, or by the end of the week if members are able to do that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Julie. So, Peter Kennan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Keen to look at anything that has the ability to improve the efficient operation of TFN. But TFN is a public-private partnership of civic and business leaders, and to me that's one of its strengths. So for me it means that the membership of any General Purposes Committee, if we have one, should be representative of the membership of the board and consequently should include LEPs. Barry's very helpfully called for a consultation exercise which could facilitate that, and I'd therefore hope that elected members in considering a consultation response might take the point about LEPs on board, and certainly I would be very happy to be involved in any members working group. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just conscious of the amount of business we've got to get through. If you do want to be on the working group, then I think just send Julie an email or a chat bar message, but for the purposes of the conversation, let's take substantive comments on the proposal. Any other comments from members? So I'm going to take my chairman's hat off. I would just like to make a comment as a board member, which would just be to support Peter Kennan's view. I think if the board wishes to have a General Purposes Committee, then I think the spirit of TFN has always been that all members round the table are equal. And I think it would be important for the working group to consider that a General Purposes Committee, if you have one, ought to reflect the balance of membership of the board. I think that's always been the spirit of the way we've worked. So just having finished that, I'll just give an opportunity back as chairman in case anybody else wants to say anything. Otherwise, Julie, I'll put the proposal to the meeting. So we have under 6.2 a proposal to initiate first a consultation with the board on future decision making, and then to set up a member working group to review arrangements. So do we support proposal in 6.2? Thank you very much, Lucy. Thank you, Liam. Yeah, okay, that's approved then. Julie, on to your third proposal.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So on the final proposal, certainly the final issue, the report sets out the current position in relation to virtual meetings of TFN's board and committees. The regulations, which members may already be aware, which are currently in force, which were made under the Coronavirus Act 2020, are due to expire on the 7th of May. And up to the current date, Parliament has not yet confirmed that it intends to extend them. On the other hand, of course, the current roadmap for release of national lockdown currently suggests that there will continue to be restrictions on gatherings and travel until at least the 21st of June, which would make face-to-face meetings either difficult or impossible. The Secretary of State for Housing and Local Government has requested local authorities to provide details of the benefits gained from virtual meetings, and Transport for the North has contributed towards that. Lawyers in local government and the Association of Democratic Services Officers have together, and on behalf of local government, commenced court proceedings to seek a declaration that the existing legislation, which is already in place, i.e. through the Local Government Act 1972, is already sufficient to enable virtual or hybrid meetings to continue after the 7th of May. And they are seeking to expedite the hearing of that claim, and obviously we're keeping a very close eye on that. Meantime, we understand that there is a debate in Parliament due to take place tomorrow. We understand that certain regulations which were made under the Coronavirus Act 2020 will be discussed, although it's not entirely clear at this stage whether the particular regulations in relation to virtual meetings are included. So overall, whilst the current situation is reasonably clear, as I've set out, how it will develop between now and the 7th of May is considerably less clear. And obviously the whole of local government is affected by this. So officers will be keeping a very close eye on developments. The timing of the June board will also need to be borne in mind, given that that's scheduled for the 9th of June as things stand. So for today, members are asked to note the content of the report for the time being, and obviously we will keep members very much in the loop and provide further information as soon as we're able to. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Julie. Helpful to have that update. Does anybody wish to say anything about it, or shall we just note it for now and look for more information? I think we're noting the position for now. I'm just checking the chat bar because there's a new comment on it. Yes, that goes back to the previous item, so that's very helpful. So I think we'll just note that for now then, Julie, under 6.3 of your paper. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Okay, so we move to item 9, where I could bring forward special business if there was special business. This was there in case we had the integrated rail plan, which we don't. So I'm not proposing any item for business for item 9. I'll then move to item 10, which is to propose the exclusion of the press and the public under the various provisions of the Local Government Act 1972 on the basis that the remaining business, it's in the public interest, should not be held in public. Does the board support that? Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Matthews. So if the executive could close down the public broadcasting